Wichita Liberty TV, featuring host Bob Weeks. Local politics without the spin. Interviews with nationally respected economists. Hear directly from Kansas conservatives about what matters to you. It's individual liberty, limited government, and free markets. Wichita Liberty TV.
Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Wichita and Kansas government and public affairs. Broadcast on Great Plains Television, channel 26.1, also its companion website, kgpt26.com. Some of you may know me from my blog, that's The Voice for Liberty at wichitaliberty.org. There the motto is individual liberty, limited government, free markets, and economic freedom in Wichita and Kansas. If you'd like to learn more about the issues covered today or to contact me, we'll visit wichitaliberty.org. You can subscribe to the email newsletter, like The Voice for Liberty on Facebook, and follow me, Bob Weeks, on Twitter. Well, this week on Wichita Liberty TV, I've known Bud Norman for quite a few years, since college days. We didn't attend the same university, but we had a common group of friends. And I'd like to tell you more about those days, but it may be that the statute of limitations has not yet expired on some of those things. Bud Norman was a reporter for many years for the Wichita Eagle, covering a variety of beats, including the Kansas State House, and he also reported for the Kansas City Star. In 2003, his novel, The Things That Are Caesar's, a comic tale of politics, religion, and other impolite topics, was published. And in 2014, he published the novel, This Town Is Nowhere, described as an alternately sad and funny tale of God's music and the devil's music and how they came together as American music. His blog is The Central Standard Times, subtitled A View from the Middle of America. You can find it on the internet at centralstandardtimes.com. I subscribe to its daily email. I suggest that you do as well. Well, Bud Norman, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, so you follow and have written a lot about the presidential race going on for quite a while, not just this year, but years before that. And now we're down to the point where people have actually cast votes that mean something. Here we're recording on Wednesday after the Iowa caucus. So we've got some results from there, and then next Tuesday, a little bit less than a week from today, will be actual people voting up in New Hampshire also as well.
Well, actual people, yeah.
Yeah, actual people, I guess. The caucuses, it's not really voting because, well, it's caucusing, a little bit different there. But so, were there any surprises coming out of Iowa, Bud, that were surprising to you?
Well, it was a real pleasant surprise that Ted Cruz was able to win after taking such a strong stand against the ethanol subsidies.
That was,
It's been driving not only conservatives, but those liberals who are also opposed to these kind of crony capitalist schemes. It's sort of unfair that that subsidy was thought to last forever because in order to become president, you have to win Iowa or do well there.
Right.
And the perception was that that would be the kiss of death. Even though
the governor of Iowa came out with a very
and
strong
a very
statement.
popular governor of Iowa encouraged everyone to vote against Ted Cruz based on that one issue. And even though it was a mere plurality, the fact that a candidate in either party was able to achieve any kind of victory in spite of that stand is a very a pleasant surprise.
Especially because, it was thought that Donald Trump was by far a leader there and would easily win, and at least that's what the polls said.
Yeah. The polls only had Trump ahead by a few percentage points, and there was always a thought that because this caucus system, it takes so much more time and effort and tests a person's patience more than just showing up at a polling place and waiting in line for a few minutes. There was always some thought that Trump was attracting, disgruntled people who have not typically been involved in the political process, and that those poll numbers would not necessarily translate in the actual voting. And I think that there was some of that. The turnout turned out to be huge or huge,
for both parties,
as Trump would say. Less so for the Democrats. There was a definite enthusiasm gap. A lot more Republicans this time around. Last time around with Obama, there were a lot more Democrats, and that was a warning signal about the enthusamgap.
There's a lot of enthusiasm for Bernie Sanders, I think, compared to Hillary.
Yeah, and but it's not quite the same. I don't think it gets the same media support that Obama did. And certainly Obama was a more youthful and charismatic figure. But then again, all the same Democrats I know who were so gaga over Obama 4 years ago are similarly smitten and enthused with Sanders
Bernie
this
Sanders.
time around.
And that caucus was very close. It was less than 1 percentage point. I calculated it's like winning an election 172 votes to 171 votes. So, I mean, very, very closely split between those two.
Well,
so.
Monday night I kept going to the CNN website to catch up on the numbers, and the Republicans, they'd tell you how many votes were cast and what percentage. Then you'd flip over to the Democrat page, and they just had delegates. There were no raw numbers of how many people voted.
And I think
then I'm reading follow-up stories in the LA Times that even the Democrat campaigns weren't able to get their hands on those numbers.
And then
apparently there were coin flips involved.
Yeah, you wrote about that, I think, in
questions.
today's column, the immaculate coin flips where
Hillary Clinton is an extraordinarily lucky woman.
I think at 6 different caucus sites they were tied somehow, so they flipped coins to decide that.
And Hillary wins all 6.
Wins all 6. I know you wrote that. You said the odds are approximately 1 in 64. Well, I can tell you they're exactly 1 in.
Well,
a fair
when
coin,
it comes to
exactly,
mathematics, I always add approximately.
Yeah, exactly 1 in 64. So it just seems highly improbable that those 6 coin flips could go that way.
Well, this woman has that kind of extraordinary luck pop up very often. You'll recall her $1,000 investment in the cattle futures market that wound up with $100,000, and that gets real complicated, the math there. But a couple of economists writing for the Journal of Economics and Finance calculated the chances of that happening as around 1 in 35 trillion, which is even worse than the odds you'll get at a Donald Trump casino.
Yeah. And when you bring up stuff like that, people say, well, that was 25 or 30 years ago. That's old news. Is that a valid criticism?
It's just an example of how long her luck's been holding up.
Yeah.
And also, what are the chances that the first woman president would turn out to be the wife of an ex-president?
Yeah.
I calculate that around 4 in 150 million.
Something like that. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So definitely, the political dynasties, the Clintons and the Bushes, I think people are showing, well, Jeb Bush really isn't going anywhere, so no. People are tired of that. And
Clinton it looks to me to be in very serious trouble.
People are showing they're kind of tired of that as well.
And there are no Kennedys or Adams or Roosevelts on the scene at all anymore.
Well, hold on to that thought a minute, Bud, because we're going to take a moment off for a commercial break. This is Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV. We'll be back in just a moment. Well, welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me this week, Bud Norman. Now, we've got kind of, I don't know if you call this an interesting situation, but you've got where a top-flight Republican candidate, Ted Cruz, I think there's definitely a shadow over his eligibility to run. I've read what seem to be very convincing arguments from top-notch legal scholars on both sides that having been born in Canada, he either is or isn't eligible for the presidency. And kind of on the flip side, over on the Democrats, the presumptive nominee, which I think is still Hillary Clinton, no matter how well Bernie did in Iowa and may do in New Hampshire, she could possibly be facing criminal charges before too very long.
Well, I think that there's a better case to be made against Hillary Clinton than against Cruz. I kind of take that. I noticed, by the way, that the Illinois election board today certified Ted Cruz and made a definitive statement that he is a natural-born citizen. It's an issue I take kind of personally, because I myself was not born in the United States.
Oh, you weren't? Where were you born?
I was born in the Philippines.
Okay.
And I was born there. You might gather from looking at me that I'm not at all Filipino, but I was born there because my father was serving in the United States Air Force. Okay. And I like to think my mother was also serving her country there by being a military spouse. And it's unlikely that the chances of my ever becoming president are even more remote than the chances of Hillary making all that money legally in the cattle futures market. But still, I'd like to think that I'd still like to think of myself as a real American.
Sure, absolutely. So it is kind of a technical argument that I wonder how that's ever going to be resolved. You said the Illinois election board put Cruz on the ballot. So, so I don't know. These things through the courts take a lot of times, but I'm reminded of Bush versus Gore or whatever in the 2000 election. That went straight to the Supreme Court pretty quickly. I wonder if that could happen if there was an actual question about Ted Cruz.
There have been, John McCain, you'll recall, was born in Panama. Similar situation to mine. His parents were stationed there on military duty.
And then there's Donald Trump.
His dad was a full
admiral,
though.
Yeah, there's Donald Trump who thinks that Barack Obama was born in Kenya.
Yeah. So, as much as I'd like to believe that, the birth announcement that ran in the Honolulu Advertiser always kind of settled that for me. I think you can question Obama's Americanism in terms of, Americanism as a political philosophy, but I noticed that he's still president of the United States.
Yeah, he is, and likely to finish out his term.
I've read both arguments, too, and it looks kind of weak. One thing that strikes me is how many of Trump's supporters will go on these internet message boards or call into radio talk shows and talk about him. He's a Canadian, which... I can understand why, a Canadian shouldn't be the president of the United States, but they sort of spit out the words as if being a Canadian is just a really
aren't they like our leading trading partner? We don't have to have a fortified border between us and Canada, so...
well, they punt on third down.
Yeah, okay, football there. So what happens, but if in a month or two or something like that, if Hillary faces a criminal indictment from the FBI or Justice Department or whatever, what's going to happen then?
First of all, I don't think it's really all that far-fetched. Given how politicized the Justice Department has become over the past 7 years, I understand the cynicism, they'll never, ever indict her. On the other hand, I don't know that Obama has any particular affection for Hillary or her husband or their family dynasty. I think that he would be happy to seize an opportunity to demonstrate how even-handed he can be. And I can also believe he might have some plan to install somebody more to his liking. So I don't dismiss the possibility that Hillary gets indicted.
So all these Democrats that looked at the race and passed on it, like Joe Biden, for example, maybe Elizabeth Warren, John Kerry, they must be thinking, dang, I wish I'd gotten in there because the primary opponent might be taken out.
They might very well be hoping that they're the plan B that the party... comes up with in the event of an indictment. There's always a possibility that Hillary will battle right along.
Being indicted that's just an accusation of a crime. It's not a conviction. So.
Eugene Debs ran for president while sitting in a jail cell. And and given the Clinton family history, an indictment, I can see her sloughing that off and just slogging right along.
And there's kind of a lot of angst in the Republican Party, too, as evidenced by the National Review entire issue a week or two ago given over towards the against Trump. That was the cover story, and I didn't read every one of those, but I read quite a few of them. And
I read them all.
Okay, so what happens if Trump continues to poll well and starts winning primaries, and what's going to happen in the Republican Party, do you think?
It's going to be an acrimonious fight. And it's hard to see everyone hugging and making nice at the end of it. When Trump first came in, everyone, myself included, assumed that this was, a brief fad and that it would be over by now. Now, at this point,
everybody's been
at this
on
point,
that,
you really do need to start contemplating the possibility of a Trump candidacy.
Yeah. Well, hold on to that thought, bud. We're going to take another moment off for a commercial break. When we come back, I want to continue talking about Donald Trump for a moment. So this is Bob Weeks with Wichita Liberty TV. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me this week, Bud Norman. So, there's this kind of this angst going on in the Republican Party about the establishment, the grassroots, the Tea Party. You've written about that and spoke about that at the Pachyderm Club a couple years ago. One thing I've noticed, do you notice that very few people will admit to being part of the establishment?
Nobody will. And I'm not, and it's a very ill-defined term.
Yeah, so I think we can say people like Bob Dole, John McCain, these are
Jeb
Romney.
Bush.
Yeah, the whole Bush
Anybody
clan.
named Bush.
Yeah, these are part of the Republican establishment, but why is it hard to figure out who is in sometimes?
It's just sort of a convenient term to blast away at those shadowy figures that you can blame all your country's troubles on. And certainly the average Republican voters' dismay with the party's congressional leadership, I think, is entirely understandable.
Speaking, I think, of John Boehner primarily, and Mitch McConnell.
And so far, Paul Ryan.
Because Paul Ryan, for a long time, has been looked at someone who's really a hawk on budget issues, but then the first budget that he shepherded through as Speaker, when Mike Pompeo was on this show a few months ago, he said, we gave up the spending caps, those spending caps that had worked for a few years to hold down the growth of spending. They went right through them.
And probably didn't get the military expenditures that a lot of conservatives would have hoped for. Yeah, a lot of bad deals have been made. They haven't been able to undo Obamacare, and not for lack of trying. They haven't been able to hold to those budget issues you want. Planned Parenthood still gets its money. I can well understand the dissatisfaction of Republican voters. What's harder to understand is why they choose as their solution a man who actually boasts of the politicians he's bought off and the crony capitalism
Donald
that
Trump.
he's done. It's a fellow who until very recently held all sorts of liberal positions.
Had been registered as a Democrat.
Yeah, and spoke to interviewers frequently about his preference for Democratic positions on a wide variety of issues. I think a big part of his appeal was he was the first guy to come out and you have to give him credit for daring. He not only went after the immigration issue, but he did so with language and with a vehemence that had not been seen.
Build a beautiful, beautiful wall, and we're going to get Mexico to pay for it, and that's why.
But on the other hand, just 4 years ago, when Mitt Romney suggested self-deportation, Donald was just aghast at such a racist concept as that.
And so that
he's
leads
a recent convert to the issue that is his main
so that leads to a lot of
source
people's
appeal.
Trouble with Trump is that, gee, does he really believe, does he really have fundamental principles that he believes, or does he just want to get elected and make some deals?
Everyone out there, if you love Donald Trump, don't hate me, but the conclusion I've reached is that Donald Trump is primarily interested in Donald Trump, and that is basically his ideology is what's good for Trump is good for everybody. Yeah.
Well, that's and it's really puzzling as to what I think draws people to him. I look at, I don't know if you've read The Road to Serfdom by Frederick Hayek, but talks about the problems with moving towards more centralized planning. Eventually, you look for a strong man who can come in and make things work. And to me, that's Donald Trump. I mean, that's what his supporters say. He's going to get in there, and he says the current people are stupid. Well, I don't think Barack Obama's stupid. He's had a lot of success. I mean, Obamacare was a legislative success. Don't agree with the policy, but he got the Dodd-Frank banking regulations through. He's had a lot of legislative success in a wrong way, I think. But
mostly, of course, in those first 2 years when he had a
Democratic
Congress.
And then he's been able to do these executive orders that.
Hopefully, hopefully those will all be undone by executive order, and so it is a slight victory that he was forced to resort to these extra constitutional means. It's bad for the country when a president does that, but at least it's more easily undone, undoing that awful Iran deal is going to be tough. Even with a friendly Congress and president, undoing Obamacare is going to be tough. Anything passed into law is a bigger problem.
Once you've given an entitlement to people, then to take it away is very
well. You mentioned Hayek. I think part of Donald Trump's success, a lot of people who consider themselves conservatives haven't read Hayek. They haven't read Friedman. They don't know who Edmund Burke is. They're conservative just in that they have an instinctive antipathy to liberalism. A lot of people who call themselves liberals have never read Michael Harrington. They just like the free stuff. Donald Trump is tapping into those conservatives who aren't ideologically grounded conservatives.
Yeah, they think that if we have a strong president, then things are going to be
which is a human instinct that the ancient Israelites. It's in the Old Testament. They demanded a king, and God said, "What do you want a king for?" They take your money, they send you to war. They wanted a king. That's a human instinct that just cannot be eradicated.
Yeah. Well, that's where us libertarian, or I should say me as a libertarian, we sometimes have to rail against that. Well, Bud Norman, we've flat run out of time today, so thank you very much for coming into Wichita Liberty TV.
With you,
it's been a pleasure. So thanks, Bud. And that's all the time for today, but we'll be back next week with another episode of Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks.